the governor? And I'll say, most things no, but some things yes. And one of the things you miss is when you fly out of the airport, it's really nice to be the governor. Do you remember in the old days when your flight left at 1 o'clock and you got to the airport at 12:45? When you're governor, it still works that way. And so you show up, and whatever that the flight actually boards, you show up then. And I was flying out of Nashville to the West Coast one time, and whatever the boarding time is, I show up, and they, if you've ever flown Southwest, they have numbers that you board by. Somehow when you're governor, the number's always 1. And so I walk on and get on I get to be the very first person on the airplane, so I choose the exit row aisle because it's got a little extra leg room, and we're flying all the way to Los Angeles, so it's 4 hours, so and the next person walks in. Remember, it's a whole empty airplane, and she sits in the aisle seat right next to me. Really? And so I say, hey, how you doing? She goes, I can't believe it. I said, can't believe what? She goes, I get to sit next to the governor. I go, uh-huh. And she goes, for 4 hours. And I go, uh-huh. And she goes, this is so cool. I said, can we take a selfie? And so we take a selfie. And then she goes, my husband is a huge fan of all this political stuff. Can we call my husband? I go, sure. And so we call her husband. And then we're sitting there. She goes, hey, people are in my office by now. Can I FaceTime your boss? And so she FaceTimes somebody, and they're walking around the office like, hey, look at Susie with the governor, And so all this is going on and on. And we're so early, the plane is still boarding. And all of a sudden, this is like 7 years ago. You know how your iPhone, if you used to, if you took a picture, it'd make that click sound like a camera used to. And all of a sudden, I hear that noise going off. And I look up, and down the aisle of the center aisle of the airplane are the 4 lead singers from Little Big Town, a very country music band, a big group. And so everybody's like, wow, and the plane's kind of buzzing, and the woman who's sitting next to me, standing up, reaching around, trying to take her picture, and she sits back down and says, well, now I don't feel like I got such a good seat after all. So I'm kind of used to that at this point. All right, real quick. How many people are frustrated and exhausted by politics today? How many people? And by the way, I ask that question everywhere. If you ever want a 100% answer, ask that question, okay? The question is, what do we do about it? Let me back up a little bit and say, first of all, I'm really grateful for this church and its work in this community for a long, long time. I really mean that. As somebody who grew up about a mile away from here and played on the playground and everything around here, just the long-term impact of this church, I'm really grateful for. But we believe some crazy things in the church. I take it that every so often you say the Apostles' Creed here. And so it starts out talking about that we think that the God of the universe, by the way, the universe, they can't figure out how big it is, okay? But the best estimate, what they mapped so far, is 570 sextillion miles across, okay? A sextillion has 20 zeros, so think of a million having 9 zeros. Okay, add 11 more zeros times 570. That's how many miles they just know about. Okay, we think that the God of the universe, that created all the universe and wired all of our bodies to work in this amazing way, we think the God of the universe became man. It says that the Word of God took on flesh. And Eugene Peterson, who wrote a translation called The Message, says, and he moved into the neighborhood. We think the God of the universe took on flesh and moved into the neighborhood. That's kind of crazy, right? And then even crazier, we think, okay, well, I get how this movie's going to work. The God of the universe is going to come here and he's going to take over and all of a sudden set everything wrong right. But instead of coming to kill the bad guys, like you think the movie would work, he came to let the bad guys kill him. Right? So that's like, that's not what I was expecting. And then even crazier, we believe, and we say in the Apostles' Creed, we believe that after being killed, he descended into hell and then resurrected again in bodily form, not as a ghost. the gospel in the hands of one of the motliest crew of people that you've ever seen. The disciples would come in. Remember when your kids were little, and the minute you said, we have to go, and you haven't even finished saying in the grocery store, whatever it is, one of them was saying shotgun. Okay, that's who the disciples are. They were fighting over who was going to get to sit in the front seat the whole time. And their leader was Peter. Peter, we can say this because we're from East Tennessee and it's just us. Peter was a redneck. Okay? And whatever the first century equivalent of bar fights were, Peter led, I guarantee he led the neighborhood in bar fights. But at one point in time, Jesus asked the disciples, says, who do people say that I am? And they throw out different ideas. And Peter says, I think you're the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus turns to Peter and says, and you are Peter, and on this rock I will build the church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. That's the charge that Peter got, okay? Later on, really close to when Jesus knows he's going to die, and so he tells his disciples, here's what's getting ready to happen tonight. They're going to come to arrest me, and you guys are all going to run for the hills. That's how this is going to happen tonight. And Peter goes, maybe everybody else, but not me. Not me. I'm here to the end. And we kind of, if we're watching this movie, we're kind of encouraged because as they arrest Jesus, Peter's kind of following to where they're interrogating him, hanging around outside. But then 3 times, and you all remember this part of the story, Peter gets asked, like, aren't you one of them? Aren't you a Galilean? Aren't you with Jesus? And 3 times, including probably the last 2 to a 12-year-old girl, he says, no, not me. And Peter remembers then that Jesus had said, you're the rock, and on you I will build a church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Have you ever kind of felt a little bit like an imposter? Like, I'm really not. I felt like that all the time as governor. I'm really not what everybody thinks I am. Okay, all of us, I think if we're honest, at times feel that way. Peter had to think, I'm the biggest imposter of all, and I'm certainly no rock, and it doesn't look like it looks like the gates of hell actually will prevail against the church, because it looks like Jesus is going to be executed here, and none of this is going to happen. So Peter denies him, goes home, we don't know, but guessing feeling like an imposter. Later on, years later, Peter is actually crucified the same way that Jesus was, except he said, I don't deserve to die the way he did, so have the cross be upside down. We're not 100% certain that's true, but pretty certain that's how Peter actually died. And he said, I don't deserve to die the same way Jesus did. So he dies with an upside down cross. What happened in the middle? What happened in the middle is Peter, we know, actually believes in what we just celebrated 2 weeks ago at Easter, that actually happened, that Jesus actually did resurrect, was resurrected from the dead, and then everything changed. Everything from that moment on was different. Here's what I think about the gospel that we talk about every week. If it's true, it changes everything. And everything includes our politics. And like they always say, like there's 2 things you shouldn't talk about in public company, religion and politics. But I politely disagree. Because I think our faith is who we are. And if we're going to segment that as part of our life, then it's not really what we truly believe. And our politics, we actually can't avoid. You might say, I'm over it. But life doesn't work that way. You don't get to just set yourself aside from the issues of the day. So, what are we to do about it? Like I said, I took the show of hands, and there was 100% agreement about being frustrated and exhausted. What should we do? People ask me all the time, like, how do we get better? They think, because I happened to be in office for a while, that I have the answer to the problem. You don't always have, I can assure you in office, you don't always have the answers. Sometimes you get blamed for things that aren't your fault, and sometimes you get credit. I see Tommy Ayers here, and I can finally confess this to Tommy. I was mayor, and Tommy called me one time and said, Tommy always called me Billy, he said, Billy, they haven't paved my street in 30 years. And I said, okay, Mr. Harris, let me check on that. But there was a schedule that they had to pave the city roads. Okay, well, as good fortune would have it, by chance, they were scheduled to pave Tommy and Mitch's road the next day. And so it happens. And so Tommy calls me and says, I've been dealing with politicians all my life. You're the first person that ever actually listened to what your constituents said. So I'd love to tell you I was that responsive, but at this time the schedule worked out really well. Anyway, you get blamed for a lot of things that aren't your fault, and you get credit for some things that are. But let's talk a minute about, well, what are we supposed to do? Well, I have a little bad news on the front in terms of what are we as the church supposed to be doing. Jesus always starts with us. When there's a problem, he doesn't say, well, it's their fault. He always starts with us, the people that are supposed to be part of the family. If you think about when the woman's caught in adultery, he doesn't, his response is to look to the elders among the group and say, well, what about you all? It always starts with us. In the greatest sermon ever, the Sermon on the Mount, the whole sermon's about what should Christians be like. But I can give you in some passages, we'll preach on the Sermon on the Mount for like 2 years because there's that much in there. But I can say it in 2 words. We're supposed to be different. That's who we are. We're supposed to be different. The passage he talks about in Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, is salt and light. Christians are called to be salt and light. What's that mean? The salt, what was salt's purpose in that day? It was a purpose. It kept meat from going bad. So if the meat goes bad, is it the meat's fault? No, right? You don't blame the meat for going bad. It's the salt's fault. And Jesus goes on to say, if the salt has lost its saltiness, it's good for nothing except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. So he immediately turns the situation back to us like, if the meat's gone bad, it's the salt's fault. And he says we're also supposed to be light. Now, if you walk into a room and you flip on the light switch and it doesn't get light, do you blame the dark? No, you blame the light as not doing what it's supposed to. So Jesus always starts with us when he says, what should we do about it? One of the unfortunate things I learned being in office was that Christians were no different, and maybe even worse, when it came to how we acted in the public square. Just as likely to send really hateful emails, just as likely, if not more, to pass on something that they read on the internet that may or may not be true, just as likely to think that the enemy or the person who was on the other side of some issue really was their enemy. I wrote the book, Faithful Presence, with the idea, like, what would it look like if Christians actually acted out what we believed in the public square? Now, I know a lot of you are saying, listen, I am not in the public square. A few of you actually been involved in things, but you are, right? I mean, you're involved in your community. It matters to you who gets elected. I hope you're a voter. All of us are in the public square one way or another, and all of us certainly have conversations about that. So what would it look like to act like what we really believe in the public square? So if we really believe that that tomb was empty and that everything is different, what would our politics look like? By the way, there's a lot of ways you can't answer that question. I know what I believe in terms of fiscal policy. I know what I believe in terms of what schools should look like. But I can't prove any of that to you with biblical reasons. I can't. I know what I think really works best in government. But there are 3 things that I think without a doubt should characterize our approach to politics that really are clear to me. The first thing that should characterize our approach to politics is humility. They say in politics, there will never be a traffic jam on the road to humility. And it's really true. But one of the things that we fundamentally believe about the gospel is this idea that we've all fallen short. That all of us have, like Isaiah said, like sheep have gone astray. And so I know if I'm wrong about a lot of the things I'm wrong about. If Chrissy was here, she'd say I'm wrong about a lot more than I think I'm wrong about. But if I know that, then I know I might not be right about everything I think, even politically. Howard Baker, who a lot of you actually knew personally, all of you know who he was, but he had a saying that was, always remember the other fellow might be right. Okay, this idea, that's a good place to start a discussion of politics, is the other fellow might be right. Peter, the disciple we were talking about earlier, and then James, who was, you'd argue Peter was the disciple closest to Jesus. James, who was Jesus' half-brother, both write the exact same line. They use the exact same verse. And you think, well, they both use the same verse, they're quoting something in the Old Testament, but they're not. Both of them say, for God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So if you want to know whose side God is on an issue, he's on the side of the humble, and he's against the proud. We think, well, God, I'm on God's side on this one. Maybe. But we do know this, if there's pride involved, he's on the other side. So that would be the first approach, is we don't get it right, we know we don't get it right the rest of our lives, so we should walk into a discussion knowing, I might not have this exactly right either. The second is wisdom. We always, I'm betting this church, like churches all around, pray frequently, and hopefully you do too, for wisdom for our leaders. Like, boy, we need some wise leaders. But the issue is, what does wisdom look like? And James, who we talked about before, Jesus' half-brother, actually talks about wisdom from above, and what's it look like? And think about this as you think about your politics. He says, wisdom from above is pure, peaceable, it's gentle, it's open to reason, it's full of mercy and good fruits, it's impartial, and it's sincere. So I'm not going to ask you to grade your papers out loud here, but if I graded myself on pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere, I don't know that I'd get a great grade. And yet that's the wisdom that we're supposed to be praying for. The second thing, first thing is humility, the second thing is wisdom. The third thing is we have to start thinking of people who disagree with us, not as the people who are on the other side or as enemies, but as fellow image bearers of God. The Bible talks about all of us are created in the image of God. If that's true, then I just can't look at people on the other side of the argument in the same way. When I was in office one time, I was up in Upper East Tennessee. It'd been a really, really long day. It was like 9 o'clock, and we had to drive back to Nashville, so I'm sitting in my mind thinking, we got 5 hours to go home, and it's 9 o'clock. I finished speaking somewhere and walking back to the car, and this woman grabs me and says, I know what you did, and I know why you did it. She goes, and it really is your fault. And I thought, it probably is my fault, but I don't know what, I'm not certain what you're talking about here. She goes, I know why you took cursive writing out of the schools. I didn't take cursive writing. No, you did so that our kids couldn't read the Constitution. And so we had this long conversation. It might not have been in my mind because I was tired and I had already gone and felt like about a 5-hour conversation. It was probably 15 minutes. But it goes on, and I started getting, how somebody's saying something that you don't agree with, and particularly about you that you don't think is right, and I started getting like, this woman. And then all of a sudden it created me like, she's creating the image of God. I can't look at her the same way that I want to look at her now. There's something called motivation, attribution, and symmetry. I didn't make that up, I promise you. It's how much you think the people that disagree with you aren't just seeing things differently, but that they're wrong, and they're wrong for bad reasons. Your motivation is, you've got a bad motive, and that's how you ended up in the wrong place. Put this in perspective, and this really, if you think about it, this is a 4-year-old study, but if you think about what's happening in the world today, it really means something. The motivation, attribution, and symmetry, how much the other side, one side thinks the other side is wrong for bad reasons in the U.S., is greater between Republicans and Democrats than it is between Israelis and Palestinians. Okay, that if you want to put it in real concrete terms, that's where we are. So I'm betting there's a couple of people with maybe more one or two thoughts right now about what I'm saying. Some of you are saying, Bill, I hear you, but I just can't care anymore. I'm just totally over it. And my politics are now a pox on both of their houses. I'm just over it. I have bad news. I don't think we actually get to say that. In the book of Jeremiah, the people of Israel are being held captive in Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar is their leader, and if you rank world's worst leaders, he's definitely on the first team. Okay, he's in the top 5. He's a horrible man, and they're being held captive. They've all been dragged from Jerusalem to Babylon. I think it's 500 to 600 miles away. And Jeremiah, the prophet, is back in Jerusalem, and he writes them. Now, I'm going to say, a lot of you have been friends for a long time. If I'm ever being held captive, I hope you write me and say, hang tight, we're coming to get you as soon as we can. Jeremiah writes them and says, get used to it, you're going to be there a while. I'm sure they thought, finally a message from Jeremiah, he's going to tell us God's special plan for saving us. And it was, you know what his plan was? You're going to be there a while, dig in. But he even does more than that. He says, plant gardens, have your children marry, have grandchildren. And then he goes on to say something that's amazing. Remember this, they're being held captive in a really bad place. And he says, seek the peace of the place where you have been called. For in its welfare you will find your welfare. It's Jeremiah 29:7. Think about that. You're being held captive, and the words are, instead of, we're going to get you out of there, or do your best to escape, it's seek the peace of the place where you've been called. I think we're all called to do that. And I have I guess the other piece of insight I'd have after being in office, it really matters who we elect. I'm not saying that from taking a Republican Democrat deal out of it, okay? I'm not saying that. It matters who our leaders are. And if we're going to seek the peace of the places where we've been called, we have to care about school board races and county commission races and state rep races. And we do, because the influence that our elected officials have over our life really is, it's a real thing in terms of the peace of our community. So if you're tempted to say, Bill, I hear you, but I'm over it, forget it, I don't think we get to say that. That's first. The second thing that a lot of people are thinking is, particularly if you're actually involved in politics, is, oh, that sounds really nice, but the stakes are too high. If we're going to be guided by humility and wisdom and seeing the other side as created in the image of God, you're asking us to bring a pillow to a knife fight. The other side is not going to unilaterally disarm. It's not that kind of world. I was speaking to a group of pastors, I won't say what denomination, and I'm kind of giving this same talk. And one of the pastors raises his hand and says, has this ever worked anywhere? I'm thinking like, okay. Question. I'd say two things. I really had two answers for it. Number one, how's what we're doing working now? Right? I mean, how's this approach working where we're all at each other's throats? Like, not so well, right? If you ever in your life changed your mind because somebody ridiculed your position and shouted at you, like, never. Like, the more somebody argues with me and tells me I'm off and I got horrible motives, etc., I'm not about to change my mind. So what we're doing now is not working, number one. And the second thing I'd say is this. Since when did we get a pass from doing what Jesus asked us to do because of our circumstances? It'd be like if I said, somebody came to me and said, listen, I know I had an affair with her, but you have to understand, she worked in the office next to me and she's gorgeous. We say, oh, okay, in that case, you get a pass. We wouldn't do that, right? And if in your business you said, well, right, I didn't pay my taxes for 3 years, but you have to understand that COVID, and then this happened and that happened. Oh, okay, that's fine. Then just cheat on your taxes. It's okay. We don't do that anywhere else. But we give ourselves a pass on how we act in our politics because the circumstances are so hard. And I just don't think that Jesus ever gave us those passes. There's a reason that Jesus wants us to be salt and light. The world needs what we have really badly, right? It needs a picture of what the gospel brings. And here's what the gospel brings that the world is dying to hear. A picture of truth and love together. A picture of justice and mercy together. Okay? How many people do you know that just don't point at anybody, but who pride themselves on being truth tellers. They said, I just tell it like it is, okay? But love feels like a foreign language to them. On the other hand, you probably know people who are great at love, but if the wind ever started blowing hard, you know they would blow over on whatever the issue is. Paul talks about speak the truth with love. The gospel is about truth and love both, okay? It's also about justice and mercy at the same time, and that's what our world's dying to hear. Right? There's people out marching in the streets saying, no justice, no peace. Okay? We need justice. But all of us know, like, I want justice too, but I hope I get a little mercy too. Because if I get treated just like what I deserve, I don't know that I'm going to like that. Because I know what I'm actually really like. We have this picture of, well, let me back up and tell a story. When you're governor, people think you're all powerful. Like, you're the governor, just do it. Well, it doesn't work that way. There's a state legislature. There's constitutional officers. There's a court system. Okay, the governor doesn't just get to do what he or she wants to do. Except in one area. The one place where the governor has almost total control is in the area of pardons and clemencies and exonerations. And as long as you're not being paid for it, as long as you're not getting, some kickback, you can kind of do almost whatever you want. So if the governor said, I'm going to clear out all of the state prisons by midnight tonight, he can do that. You really have that kind of almost total power. When I went into office, a couple of people who had been governors before me said, if I was you, I would just tell everybody, I'm not going to consider the pardons and the clemencies and all that until my last 6 months, because if you don't, that's all you're going to deal with. You will be shocked how many people come out of the woodworks and say, hey, either something real serious, my brother is got a 40-year sentence, or my sister, or something smaller. My sister got picked up for a DUI and needs it taken off of her record. I mean, you will be flooded because the power is so immense. Wait until the last. And I thought, that is great advice. And it was horrible advice. Because it was so much harder than I thought it would be. You think, okay, they're going to bring you all the cases to you, and you'll sit there and, like Solomon, say, yes, let that person out. No, don't let that person out. And a lot of you all know Dwight Tarwater, who's from here, was my general counsel during the last part of my term. And Dwight and I would sit in the room, and he and two assistants, and they bring me this thing, and I go, we kind of had a yes and no, area. And the big pile got with, I'm going to need to think about that one. Because it was really hard, right? It's really hard to decide, like, okay, maybe they've served long enough, but they did something really horrible. And by the way, the victim's family really doesn't want them out, or, you're kind of this, I kind of see both sides. Doing justice and doing mercy together are really, really hard. And some of you don't even think about raising kids, right? You want to treat them with justice, they need to learn there's consequences for their action, but mercy is so that they see love at home, right? It means we walk through that. All of us are doing that everywhere in our lives. We're trying to get justice and mercy right. The cross is really the best picture of that. We had a God who loved us so much, he really, in the greatest love story ever told, sent his son to die for us. But he didn't have to send his son to die for us. Justice had to happen. There had to be some consequence for us choosing to our own way instead of his way. And so that's what happened on the cross, is justice and love came mingled down. That's exactly what happened. The world is dying for a picture just like that. I'm going to stop. I think at least ask if I'd save a little bit of time for questions, which I'll be glad to do. But I would encourage you, and you might say, well, just a little over here, but we're in a ditch. We're in a ditch when it comes to our politics and our approach. And people keep saying, well, how are we going to, what's going to happen? Who's going to do something about this? Let me say this. It's not the media in any its forms. I'm not going to know. That's not their job. Their job is to sell newspapers and ad time, or spots on Facebook, whatever. It's actually not the political parties either. Their job is to elect their candidates. I actually think what's going to get us out of the ditch is the family of God. I really do. I think if we'll start acting like salt and light, you might say, well, we're not that many people, but I don't know. It's getting enough people start acting like this, and guess what? It's contagious. We would have thought. When Jesus died and Peter and his ragtag bunch of rednecks were, the gospel's left in their hand like that. That's not a very good plan, but I actually think that this is the best hope for the answer to the mess that we're in now. So I will stop there and we'll take questions for 10 or 15 minutes and get everybody out of here reasonably on time. Anybody want to be the brave one with the first question?
I know there are a lot of...
Okay, yeah.
Hi, Governor. Thanks for being here today. Probably less of a question, more of a comment, but just thank you for what you and Governor Bredesen are doing with the podcast. And I would encourage anyone that's doing it. It's been amazing. I love it. I'm forcing it on my children. It's really great. So thank you so much.
Thanks. Governor Bredesen was my predecessor, and the idea is we get a Democrat and Republican together to talk about really hard issues and bring in guests on taking some hard issue, take gun control. And let's bring in somebody on, like, here's why assault rifles should be okay. Here's why they should not be. But instead of people that yell at each other, to kind of thoughtfully present the argument. Because Lisa and I always talk about this. Usually, even on something you feel really strongly about, there is another side of the argument. And the idea was to bring in, take a hard topic, and bring in folks who look at it differently and have a kind of a thorough, screaming conversation. I wanted to call it, we stole Hal Baker's line, always remember the other fellow might be right, it's called You Might Be Right. I wanted to call it No Shouting Allowed. That failed for lack of a second, so.
You should have shouted.
Yeah.
Do you think you're going to have any more future in politics?
Yeah, that's it. Nobody ever had a past in politics by a lot of people in this room, and I'm just saying it's really true. Honestly, don't know. I had a couple of chances to run for Senate and decided not to. I still really care deeply, but it has to be kind of the right role at the right time. I've always told people what I would really love if somebody that I really liked and they liked me got elected president, I'd love to go help them in the right role. It has to be somebody I really like and they really like me, so the odds of both of those happening might not be huge. But I'm always going to stay involved, but whether I'll actually run or have a public role or not, I don't know.
Do you feel like it would be harder for you to work with the current legislature than the legislature you had? Because today they seem so inflexible that I don't know how any governor could work with them very well.
I'll say this. The bottom line answer to your question is yes, to an honest answer. I think representative bodies are more and more reflecting the political world we live in. And that's a world that rewards performance more than change. I always say, we have a lot of people who want to make a point and a lot fewer who want to make a difference.
Yes.
And, I mean, again, I'm just a Republican Democrat. I hope you will elect people who actually talk about how they're going to solve the problem instead of just complaining about the problem in the same way that you do. I'll give you a really great example. Immigration is really hard, okay? If you think about the two things you want to do, we want to treat people humanely. If I'm living in Venezuela, I might be trying to get my family here too, okay? And so I understand that now. I hope we're treating people with the dignity they deserve. But we also need a border. We can't have a country that there's 330 million people in the U.S. The estimates are if we just let everybody in that wanted to, we'd have over 1 billion people here, okay? So that doesn't work either. So coming up with a policy that actually does both of those things is hard. But it's actually doable. I honestly believe that. The problem is there's no political reward in doing it, right? Both sides are Democrats sending mailers out saying Republicans want to put kids in cages, and Republicans send out mailers saying Democrats just want to let everybody in because they're going to become their voters. There's no political reward in actually solving the problem. It's the same thing with some of of our, social welfare, the kind of safety net programs we have, whether it be Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all of those are basically headed toward bankruptcy. There are ways to fix it, but there's no political, I mean, right now, neither side will touch it. But so we have Social Security that's, it's on its way to be, sorry to panic everybody, but it can't pay its bills 7 years from now, okay? They'll make some sort of make-do, don't we? No, I think everybody will still, but that's actually a solvable problem. But sometimes you gotta be willing to quit politicizing it, and then you gotta be willing to take a hard stand and say, we can solve it, but it is going to mean making some changes. And both candidates for president are saying, not gonna touch it, not gonna touch it. So, long answer to your short question.
Bill, what's your thought on term limitations for Senate and House?
I actually have first of all, having term limits for executive positions is 100% the right thing to do. I think no brainer. Like, I was mayor here for 2 terms and governor 2 terms. That's the right, I mean, after 8 years, it's time for you to go and somebody else take your place. I actually would, and I've changed on this, I would have term limits for Senate and House, but they might be a little long. I mean, they might be at least 12 years for the Senate, so you can serve 2 whole terms, and 12 to 15 years in the House. I do think there's some benefit to people going through enough different cycles to see what things look like. But the problem is, if you're a long-term incumbent, it's really, really hard to beat you, even if it's past time for you to go home. That would be my, I've changed. I didn't used to think you should have term limits, but I do now.
Where or maybe how do you think you most often saw Christ just on your daily time in office?
A couple of things. Yeah, it's a great question. One, it would be this. In a little bit what I talked about, is the big answer to our problem. I actually think it's the body of Christ that's addressing them the best. I mean, I look at some of our hard situations. Like Memphis has some historic challenges, for instance, okay? It's just long issues of, we have some generational poverty, which is hard to deal with. You have racial issues that are complex and go back 100 years. And public education is really difficult. I mean, I can do this anywhere. But to be honest with you, I look back there, it's like the church is the one standing in the gap. And so I would get encouraged when I see people like you in this room who are literally standing in the gap, and whether it's building houses or being in schools or whatever it was, that's what I really was. As much as I said Christians acting just like everybody else, I should have said some do, because there's also some who are out really doing work to stand in the gap. I think the second thing is this. I think is having faith hopefully changed the way that I got to being in office is really hard. It just is. You're very visible. You're taking a stand. I mean, listen, if you win a race 55% to 45%, 10% is a landslide. But that still means almost half of the people didn't want you. Okay, when you think about it. So you have to kind of get used to a lot of people being against you, and you have to even people on your own side. And so you have to, at the end, it's like, I gotta figure out what's the right thing to do and go try to do that and just rest in that comfort that I'm trying to be obedient and faithful here. I think it might have been harder to do that if I didn't actually have my own faith. In this sense of like, there's a calling to do the right thing and be obedient, let the chips fall. Right, maybe 1 or 2 more before we have to go. Anybody? Sorry, yeah. Oh, sorry.
How do you think we got in this mess in the first place?
How have we got this mess? First gradually, then all at once. Listen, our politics have never been this, peaceful, everybody together, holding hands. Andrew Jackson, we have 3 Tennessee presidents. Andrew Jackson probably being the best known of those. Jackson's on his deathbed at the Hermitage, okay? About 10 miles east of downtown Nashville, where, by the way, downtown Nashville has been into 2 duels with people, okay? But he's on his deathbed, and they say, General, he my President Jackson, Joe, do you have any regrets that you want to express before you die? And he said, and he whispers, yes, I wish I had shot Clay and hung Calhoun. Well, Clay was the Speaker of the House, and Calhoun was his own vice president. Okay? And so it's never been like, well, that's sort of the nature of it. But I will say this, it's been exacerbated by the world we live in today for a couple of reasons. Social media really has changed everything. It just has. And in two ways. And one for us to be aware of. You know, when most of us grew up, there's some people younger in here, but you know, we all watch pretty much the same news. Now there's 80 different news channels. Tell me your politics and I can tell you what news channel you like. And you know what about? We all have confirmation bias. I want people to tell me what I already think is true. I mean, when I was in office, I'd read an article about me that was good. I think there were 4 of them. I would read every word. And if it was bad, I'd you know, and we're all that way, right? If we agree, we you know, and we can more and more choose what we believe to be true. And by the way, that's what our phone does to us too. You punch on enough articles, and whether it's, you know, about the British royal family or what, you know, what's happening in the Trump trials or what Biden did on student debt, I mean, you punch up enough, you'll start getting a lot more of those. Okay, and so our news is being self-curated, and more we're thinking, I'm right. Everything I read says I'm right. So that's one. The second is it encourages people in political office to be performative. Because when everything changed, it was not when you know, Facebook came out, Instagram, and Twitter, etc. Everything changed when Facebook put the like button on and Twitter gave me the ability to retweet. Because once I could get some feedback, they said, oh, people like it when I post this sort of thing. Or they retweet my comment when I say this sort of thing. They tend to be the things that are more performative and controversial and throw red meat to whatever crowd you want to throw it to. And so it just encourages that behavior. So my last thing was this. Everybody says, if you had a magic wand, what would you do? I'd say there would be a law in the land that said no elected official could go on social media and say anything without having a very specific solution to the problem. So, thank you all.